Hey, AP Environmental Science. So we're going to get started with our first set of notes. It's APES Unit 1, the Living World Ecosystems. You should have a typed out document of guided notes that you can fill out as we go along. Make sure that you pause when you need to pause so that you can write down the key information. Okay? All right, so we are, again, in Unit 1. Which has basically 11 subtopics. Today we're just going to be concentrating on 1.1, which is Introduction to Ecosystems. When you look at the learning objectives for 1.1, it's explain how the availability of resources influences species interaction. So we're really going to be looking at, from one species and another, how they impact each other, how it impacts where they live, and the resources that they're able to get. So levels of organization is the first thing we're going to talk about. In biology, we talked about levels of organization, but we mostly focused on, atoms form molecules, which form cell organelles, which form cells, which form tissues, which form organs, those form organ systems. And then finally, those organ systems work together and give us our base unit for ecology, which is one creature. And the term we use for that is, of course, organism. All right. If we have all of the same organism in the same place, so this is all the same type of fish, all in the same place, we're going to call that a population. If you add in other species, so all the living things in one place, we've got a community. And then when you add in the abiotic factors, the living and non-living things, and it's not just things, it's any kind of abiotic factor. So we're talking temperature, amount of precipitation, the pH, all those things. Here it's showing you the sand and the clouds and the water. Those are all abiotic too. But when you include both biotic and abiotic, that's an ecosystem. And then finally, if you include everywhere on Earth that we find life, that's the biosphere. If Earth was an apple, the biosphere would basically be like the skin on the apple. All right, so a little quiz. If we're just looking at Simba here, that of course would be a very good organism. In this picture, I can just hear the circle of life. All right. If you're looking, you see both biotic and abiotic, so that would be an ecosystem. And then finally, if we're just looking at mom and baby, we've got a population there. So community ecology, the study of species interaction. So why do we find species in a particular location? All right, there's basically three factors that come into play. One is their fundamental niche. So the niche is what conditions are they able to live in. So niche is actually even greater than that. It's like when do they reproduce? What do they eat? Where do they live? All those different things. The mobility is how far can they move during their lifetime? Are they going to move inches during their lifetime? Are they going to move miles? And then finally, interactions with other species, which is going to be our focus. So if we look at, say, something like an earthworm, its fundamental niche, where are they able to live? Well, obviously they live underground, and underground there's going to be specific temperatures and moisture conditions that they're going to need. You don't see a lot of earthworms in the desert, all right? It's just it's maybe too hot and it's definitely too dry, all right? So the yellow box here represents all of the conditions in which they would be able to survive, the amount of moisture and the temperature, the combination there. The realized niche is where you would actually find them, all right? And this is going to be determined, they don't match up because number one, maybe they've never been introduced to an area, and even though it has the fundamental niche they could survive in, they've never been introduced, and earthworms travel fairly slowly, right? Another could be interactions with other species. So maybe other species would outcompete them or eat them and prevent them from from taking up more area. All right, so for species interactions, there's basically 5 different species interactions: competition, predation, parasitism, mutualism, commensalism. And I'm sure you've heard most, if not all of these before. 3 of these are considered symbiotic, which are close long-term relationships that develop between 2 species. Which are they? Well, I meant for this bottom window to pop up later, but they are already there. So this is what they are: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. So on your notes you have a little table, and the pluses and minuses and zeros kind of indicate in these interactions, do species benefit, do they suffer, or are they not affected? So first looking at competition, when you introduce if you already have one species in an area and you introduce another species, basically neither species is going to get everything that they need. All right, so they both are going to suffer because the other species is present. Neither is going to get all that they want. One might be a slightly better competitor than another and have an advantage, but nobody benefits when all of a sudden you have to share something. Imagine you have a bag of M&Ms and somebody comes over to share it, and neither of you get as much as you want. All right, for predation, it's pretty obvious. You would have a plus and a minus. One thing eats another thing. For parasitism, again, plus and a minus. So parasitism differs from predation in that generally it's just maybe feeding on part of an organism, and for the most part, parasitism does not result in the death of an organism. They suffer. They might eventually kill it, but over time, it's not beneficial for the parasite to kill the host immediately, because then they lose their home. All right, they lose their host, their home. Mutualism is when you have, an example of parasitism would be like a mosquito in a person. Mutualism, like a bee pollinating a flower, both benefit. The bee gets food, the flower gets pollinated. Again, they both would have pluses. And then finally, for commensalism, you're going to have relationships like here's a shark and a remora fish. The remora fish kind of trails along beside the shark and just eats the food that falls out of the shark's mouth. In that case, the remora fish benefits, and the shark really is not affected at all. All right, so that would be a good example of commensalism. So make sure you fill out the table there. All right, now competition. For competition, you can't have two species that occupy the same exact niche, that have the exact same needs, need to live in the exact same place. If they overlap too much, basically what usually happens is that one will die out. Either one will have to leave or one will have to die out. This idea that two species can occupy the same niche is called the competitive exclusion principle. In the graphs on the right, I'm showing you a famous study that were done with Paramecium. So that's what these little pictures are, Paramecium. So we have Paramecium aurelia and Paramecium caudata. And if you take a look at the top graph, all right, Paramecium aurelia, all right, when it was grown separately from caudatum, this is what the growth looked like, the population size. All right, so it increased, and then kind of leveled off over time. All right. When it was grown along with caudatum, it increased, and it leveled off over time, but notice that it never did reach the same level of population that it did when it was growing by itself. All right. For P. caudatum, when it was grown separately, it increased, and it leveled off. All right, just what we expect. When it was grown along with Aurelia, though, it increased, and then it kind of crashed and really didn't level off. It's going down, down, down. So you can see from this that Paramecium aurelia is the better competitor. And when they were grown together in the same area, their niches overlap too much, and basically both can't survive. So in real life, you're not always going to get things dying out. Basically, that's a reason where you would maybe have a fundamental niche that looks different from a realized niche. An organism will simply leave and go somewhere where there's less competition. So that would often happen. All right, now how can an organism gain a competitive edge like over another organism? If it grows faster or taller, a lot of weeds germinate sooner in the spring, gaining an advantage over other vegetation. They can beat other species to the resource. Again, getting there different times of the day, that sort of thing. All right, so how can species avoid competition? All right, this is really important. Again, things don't always just die out. There are things that can be done that avoid competition, and one of the most common is resource partitioning. So in spatial partitioning, you might have species that are generally in the same space, but they kind of partition it into little microcosms. So if we're talking about plants, especially like out in the Great Plains, you have so many herbaceous plants, but some have roots that only go a few inches down, and others have roots that might go up to 30 feet under the ground. So you're going to have less competition for water, less competition for nutrients when you have them spread out different areas. This is kind of a famous picture for resource partitioning with the birds. So you can have 5 different types of warblers in the same tree. They utilize different parts of the tree, or maybe some of them eat the berries and others eat the needles. Others eat insects in the tree. So that's different ways to partition the resources so there's less competition. Temporal partitioning is splitting things up time-wise, so utilizing the same resource at different times, like coyotes and wolves. If they are in the same general area, you'll find that the coyotes basically avoid hunting at the same time that the wolves hunt. And part of that is that the wolves will hunt them, but it also gives them an opportunity to get to the food when the wolves aren't there. So hunting different times of day. Plants will bloom at different times of the month to avoid competition for pollinators pollinating them. Okay. And then morphological partitioning is when species actually evolve different physical features, larger body sizes, different beak shapes. I'm going to post this video. It doesn't let me play it within this video, so I'm going to post this on Google Classroom, but it's showing you how woodpeckers can actually utilize different parts of the tree. Some will have the sap, others will have beaks that are adapted to get insects, or tongues that are adapted to get insects and things like that. All right, for predation, you guys know what predation is, but there are different types actually. So true predators actually kill and eat their prey. So you're thinking of a wolf eating a deer, all right? They're going to kill it, they're going to eat it, okay? So herbivores are technically predators, but they only consume plants, all right? So they are consuming a living thing, but their prey are just plants. So deer, moose, rabbits generally are herbivores. Parasites, it's a type of predation, but again, as I mentioned, they generally don't kill their hosts. So fleas and flukes, things that you try to protect your pets against would be parasites. And a lot of parasites actually cause diseases, and any parasite that actually causes a disease is called a pathogen. So like mosquitoes that cause malaria and West Nile virus and things like that. So we've got a whole list here, roundworm, flatworms. And then there's a really neat, kind of unique category of predators called parasitoids. So these are organisms that lay eggs inside of other organisms. So they hatch out and consume organisms from the inside out. So some wasps and flies are that way, and I titled this Grossest Video Ever, and I will also post this. It's about 3 to 4 minutes long, but if this sort of stuff fascinates you, this is basically a parasitic wasp that takes over a caterpillar from the inside out and almost basically takes it over, almost zombifies it. So it's pretty disgusting if you like watching that. All right, so that's it. Make sure you filled out your notes. There's part of your book that goes along with this if you want to read it, but I'd say that this set of notes is pretty straightforward. All right, have a great day. Bye.